When we change our mindsets, we can change our outcomes. Save our lives from sadness, depression, and anxiety, thus giving us the freedom to live the life we want. Hi, I'm Stuart Haskin, founder of getsafe, and your host of the Movement for Change podcast. Hi, this is Stuart Haskin, your host for the podcast, Movement for Change. Today on our True Crime podcast, we have Jeff Brown, a friend of mine and retired Orange County Sheriff of 31 years. He spent many of those years doing sex crime investigations. Today, he will take us through an elder abuse case from the eyes of the investigator. The content is heavy, so it's your discretion to watch or listen. Thank you. Hi, this is Stuart Haskin, your host for the Movement for Change podcast. Today, I have my friend Jeff Brown, former Orange County Sheriff, 31 years. Say hey, Jeff.
Good morning.
He's a man of few words, so it's going to be a long podcast. No, anyway. Hey, Jeff, why don't you, Jeff, what has really intrigued me, he was working child crimes for almost 12 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, 12 and a half, almost 13.
Yeah, which I can't imagine. You see enough in the field that relates back to your family. I have small kids. You had small kids while you were doing it. So I would like for you, let's just first talk about all the things you did in the Sheriff's Department. What are the different duties?
Well, I started out, we all start out in the jail, so I worked the main jail for 6 months, and this will date myself for anyone that knows, but when the IRC opened, the Intake Release Center, I was transferred to Theo Lacey from the main jail, and I spent about 6 years at Theo Lacey. Worked a variety of positions, including the most interesting community work program, where it was kind of a, if you will, change of mindset. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Of letting inmates out of jail. So it was different. I did that my last 3 years in the jail. Then I went to North Patrol. Spent about 5.5 years in North Patrol. I was on the bike team. I was a drug recognition expert, or DRE. I was a DRE instructor. All the while, I was teaching at our basic academy. I actually started teaching when I was working the jail. I was teaching our jail academy. And then once I went to patrol, I started teaching additional classes. I left patrol and stayed in the patrol division, but I went to Orange County Transit Authority, where there were 6 deputies assigned to railroad right-of-way enforcement. I have to think carefully about saying that.
And what is that?
That is basically the railroad tracks. Where the tracks are, there's a predetermined distance from the track that you can't be on. It's considered trespassing. Here in Orange County, we have a lot of people that live and travel across those areas. Every once in a while they do get hit by trains. The unhoused population oftentimes lives in those right-of-way easements. So our job was basically enforce laws and crimes on those areas, as well as investigating crimes at transit terminals and things like that. I left there after a little over a year. I promoted in the Sheriff's Department here in Orange County. Promotion to investigations is permanent. A lot of agencies will rotate in and out of investigations. I'm very fortunate that I was allowed to stay there and actually finished my career in investigations. When I first promoted, it was, I believe it was March of 1999, I believe. And I was transferred to our economic crimes division. We called it fraud then. They try and glorify it by calling it economic crimes. It's still fraud. It sucks. It's very difficult to work.
And real quick, it sucks or difficult to work to prove things? Like, are you doing people who have their identity stolen, or are you working in frauds? And like, I did a little fraud for the reserves. We went into a dental office, and the administration lead was stealing money. But what are the sucky parts?
The hard part about it is the investigations are very, very long by design. You need to pull financial records. Oftentimes you'll have to do a forensic financial analysis to figure out where the thefts occurred or the loss occurred, and none of that happens quick. When I first started, I made a file system I would come in and call, a bunch of victims, a bunch of banks, and then I would start getting the calls back, and it would take me 15 to 20 minutes to find which case I had called about. So I had to change the whole way I filed things because you get so many calls and so many cases. And the caseload there, it was not uncommon to run 100 cases a month. So it was just very time consuming, very lengthy investigations, coupled with a lot of times the banks would just eat the loss versus try and prosecute someone because of the publicity involved. So,
and plus, isn't the financial aspect? I mean, I know in the restaurant world, slip and falls, the restaurants pay out $5,000 instead of having to go to court and use an attorney that's going to cost them $10,000.
Yes.
So there's that whole rate of return on fighting things.
Yeah.
So.
And bad advertisement, or bad publicity sometimes is just not worth it to them. And I understand, but it's difficult when you got a guy that does nothing but steal from people in one more case, and he'll probably go to prison, and the bank doesn't want to prosecute because of bad publicity. But so I left there. I went to sex crimes, a division of sex crimes called SONAR, and it stands for Sex Offender Notification and Registration. There were two of us so assigned to that. We had an admin person, but two investigators assigned to that detail. And we kept track and monitored and basically maintained a database of the registered sex offenders in Sheriff's Department jurisdiction.
What was your thought process? Because that's a big jump, from bank fraud to actual human victims, so that's kind of, and then, the sex crime aspect, and then I guess you moved into child's, but what makes that decision?
It was different. Every day was different, not unlike fraud, but it was different in the field, if you will. We interacted a lot with our registered sex offenders. We kept close tabs on them. We rearrested a lot of them for violations of their conditions. And that's right. That's a whole sticky point. People don't even understand what a registered sex offender can or can't do in the community. We get a lot of calls about that and things regarding that. I did learn that oftentimes registered sex offenders, when they went to jail again, they knew they were done. Most, if not a large percentage of them, usually had some type of plea agreement that kept them out of prison, and a violation of that oftentimes.
The ones that were done, did you find, were they more violent towards the end, saying, I don't want to go back, because you do see some of that in the third strikers, rather than go back, or it was just, they just knew?
Most of them, they just knew. I personally never had anyone. There's been plenty that have taken their own life. Is not uncommon when they're approached to go back to prison. I have never had that happen to me, but I've heard plenty of stories of that.
Yeah, well, we had that pretty localized at our department,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of know the gig is up. And we just kind of. So let me ask you real quick before we jump into deeper in some stories or cases. Satisfaction versus bank fraud. Was it bringing in some guy or some female that were breaking their...
Anyone in law enforcement, if they're honest, they'll tell you they got into it to help people. There might be some other reasons, right? Maybe a family member pushed them or something. But by and large, most cops will tell you they got in it to help people. Did I help anybody in the jail? Probably not. In patrol, yes. Right? I can prove that to you because I have a couple of life-saving plaques and whatnot, right? So at least somebody thought I was doing my job in helping people. But it really working in sex crimes, family protection, I felt like I truly was making a difference. I know I made a difference. Sometimes the public doesn't realize that, but I get it.
Yeah, I mean, the public only sees partial of what we do, and we know because our agency, and by the way, Jeff is a lead instructor for our law enforcement training side, which does a lot of de-escalation, implicit bias, different things. But public only sees so much, They don't get to see the amazing things. Like you said, your life-saving awards and all the great encounters that don't even come to an escalation. It was a de-escalated moment that changed. Okay, so we're going to take a break for a second, and we'll resume, and then we'll get into probably one case, so you can just walk us through everything that happens. All right, so I'm going to take a break. I'm here with Jeff, and we'll see you in a moment.
Welcome to GetSafe, a proud provider of peace officer standards and training, where strong communities are built alongside law enforcement. GetSafe has taught thousands of law enforcement personnel through the years, changing mindsets so that we can have positive outcomes in the field. Our ultimate goal is to always ensure a safe interaction for law enforcement and community, never foregoing our tactics and always enhancing our toolbox. My name is Stuart Haskin, founder of GetSafe. Thank you for all you do in keeping our community safe, and we hope you join our movement for change.
All right, welcome back. And a big thank you to our sponsors. All right, I'm back here with Jeff, and he was talking about his stepping stones in his career. I did want to ask a couple of things about the jails. You had said you didn't feel as impactful in there, but you must have. There's got to be some difference made in that, or some knowledge base learned. What are the values of it? Is it just learning to deal with different populations, or what do you get out of the jail, if anything?
Well, you get acclimated to criminals. Can I say that? Is that okay to say that?
Totally fine.
All right. And the lifestyle, the language, if you will, how they are. For a lot of people, it's an extreme culture shock, myself included. Right? I generally hadn't been around anybody that had been to jail for any length of time, and I had no idea what it was like. I had no idea what to expect. I was young, I was very impressionable, and some of it was culture shock for me. I had never seen some of the things that I saw. But I mentioned earlier the community work program, that where, and I said I didn't help people. Finding the good in someone to release them in the community was difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's very, very difficult because there was a criteria I had to meet that you couldn't stretch, and it was very much black and white. So digging deep to find that criteria sometimes was an experience.
On the other hand, you must have found it a few times, which may have been surprising, that maybe because you see a lot of crime, and I have a friend that was a top tier deputy district attorney, and he always said, "Oh, I like what your agency does. I wish I could do that." I go, "What do you mean you're putting away people?" He goes, "Well, most of the people I put away have had circumstances all their lives. They've been born into a terrible environment, and that's the only way they learned." So did you see any surprising ones that all of a sudden someone did turn their life around and made the effort, and you helped them? Or none?
No, there was.
You're looking at me like, nope.
there was, working the jail, everyone says that they're innocent. So
yes.
You can't help them because they're all innocent. They were put there by circumstance that were beyond their control. Virtually everyone would tell you that. I was caught up in the wrong place, and I get that, right? But there was one particular individual that claimed his innocence. I believed him, sadly. At that young age, I didn't 100% believe him, but he had a very believable story. I didn't keep track of him, but I know what happened to him after he got out of jail. He sued the government and won. He was accused of possession, I believe it was heroin back in those days, multiple kilos of heroin. So his story, right, there's no way he could be set up. And there's no way you can sue like the DEA and win. But he did, in fact. Wow. And he went on to be a coach at a local high school here and retired from that recently. He has a very distinct name, so his story is pretty easy to find via Google. That's how I found him. Fascinating story.
Well, So at the end of the day, did you think he was innocent or?
I did. Yes, I did.
Good. And it seems like his life went in a good way. All right. So I derailed you a little bit. You started in the jails. Then you went to, what was it, patrol. Then you went to investigations, fraud, as we call it, or economic crimes. Then into sexual assault. Sonar. But what I was trying to figure out, what does it stand for again?
Sex offender notification and registration.
Then your next step is to where?
What we jokingly called was regular sex or sex crimes.
Okay.
Like there is such a thing as regular sex, working sex crimes.
Yeah.
So the detail itself, I was still in the same building. I was still in the same desk, to be honest with you. So they went through a bunch of different name changes over the years, every time we got a new captain or whatever. And I think family protection detail was generally what we were called or how we referred to ourselves. They tried the whole special victims unit thing. I think they were just following TV, to be honest with you. We also, for our crimes that we handled, primarily sex crimes. So any adult sex crime, any child sex crime. We also handled physical abuse of children. We also handled domestic violence, adult domestic violence, or interfamilial domestic violence, if you will. We also had a component of elder abuse, both physical and fiduciary, as well as sexual, if that were to occur, elder abuse. So we were pretty all-encompassing as a family unit, if you will, investigations. Certainly, if any one of these crimes resulted in the death of somebody, we would parallel investigate it with our homicide detail. We would handle the domestic violence or sex crimes component, and they would handle the death investigation or murder component, if you will.
All right, now for what maybe our audience is waiting for. Can you walk us through a case? Because I'm very interested. I mean, I'm interested from start where I can only imagine you're at your desk and you got a tuna fish sandwich and stains all over you. No, it's kind of what you see on TV. But how does this work? I mean, okay, so you guys get a call. Is there a case? Do you feel comfortable, changing the names to walk us through?
Sure. My only problem is picking one, to be honest with you, but I'll pick one that stuck with me. And in an effort to preserve the victim's personal information, I'll just call her Jane Doe. This particular call was the result of a patrol in custody. Which means patrol got a call, they responded, and they have somebody in custody. And it was for supposed sex crimes. It was, I'm trying to remember if it was a call out. It was a call out for our whole detail. I believe it was a weekend day, if I remember right. I could be wrong. I don't think I was in the office, but I believe it was a call out. And all of us went. There were probably 8 to 10 of us that went.
So you're at home and you get a call.
Correct.
All right.
Middle of the morning, I respond. Generally, we would respond from home for those calls, unless we needed something from the office. But basically, we would respond from home.
And what's the call? What does it say?
The call is a sexual assault break-in by a stranger. The victim is in her 80s. And it's in a prominent Orange County neighborhood. We get there. By the time I get there, there's a lot of police cars there. There's a lot of us there. There's neighbors. There's press. The street's kind of roped off. So generally with something like that, this was assigned to me. It was my case. Because there was the victim was elderly, I had assistance by our elder investigator, who basically made contact with the victim initially, so he would be her point. He would be her point of contact exclusively, just because that was his function. He literally, not to get ahead of myself, but at one point we did a walkthrough with the victim. and she basically had his arm and walked him through the house and showed him what had transpired.
So he created a bond with her of
Yes,
safety, so
yes.
she felt
Immediately, or as soon as we could. Then he'd introduce me, and so it's just he and I for the most part, because it can be overwhelming to somebody to have 6 or 8, 10 people milling in her house, cameras and flashes. And
besides the police officers, did you have the trauma team out there as well for, so there is a lot of activity. And she said she was in her 80s?
Yes.
Oh, man. Okay. All right.
So upon arrival, we basically we get briefed by patrol what happened. In this particular case, a neighbor was alerted to a subject who had put on some gloves and climbed over this elderly lady's fence. He had called the sheriff's department. Deputies had responded en masse. There's a good number of deputies had responded. They had some air support. I believe there was also some canines present, or at least a canine that was not deployed. But they took the subject into custody from inside the house. They made contact with the victim, who had been severely sexually assaulted. The victim, or the suspect, initially came out. He climbed out a window he had climbed into, where the witness had seen him go in. He tried to climb out that window. He was confronted by deputies. He then ran out the front door, confronted by deputies. He went back in for a few minutes and then came out and gave up. So when I arrived on scene, he was detained in the back of a car. So we had to get briefed. We generally gather up, do a quick brief as quick as we can so that we can get the ball rolling as far as we have a suspect in custody. We need to figure out what he did, what we can prove, or what we need to evidence collection and whatnot.
So are you a part of that whole evidence collection? I mean, the rape kits and all that stuff. Is there? I mean, obviously it's not you doing it, but do you follow that chain of evidence when you're there, or how does it?
We do. Generally, well, the way this went is we had a briefing from the deputies. Then we had our elder abuse investigator go and make contact with the victim, build some rapport with her, figure out if she had left off any of the details, which is not uncommon with a brutal sex crime where I don't know how she was interviewed, excuse me, if there were multiple people present or if it was one-on-one, but certainly a one-on-one setting with an investigator and or a forensic nurse or something generally would tell you a lot more information than, a patrol deputy getting information. Then with that, what we did is we video and audio taped a walkthrough with the victim. That's something that we don't generally do. We did it in largely due to her age and because of the dynamics of what was done to her. There's a lot of movement within the house, and we did that in an effort to look for additional evidence so she could identify the areas that he may have touched or been present in.
All right, so just to recap a little bit, you get the call, you're at home, you get there. Who briefs you right away? Is it who comes up to you first? Is it the elder abuse guy?
There's generally on every call, patrol call, there's an assigned deputy, whoever was assigned that call at first. If they handled the call and didn't get tied up at something, that is usually your point of contact. A supervisor was there, several patrol deputies, so we all basically just covey up. They go through what happened up until when we were notified.
Okay, and then I take it the deputies extracted the survivor as well, correct?
Correct.
Did you ever, it's pretty traumatic to people forget that cops and deputies are humans. So to see someone that may remind you of your grandma, what was the mood of the deputies there? Were they angry? Were they composed? Were they, kind of disturbed a little bit? Because those are the things that lead to that down the road PTSD stuff, seeing things like that. Did you get any mood then, or was it?
Oh yeah, the mood was bad. Everybody was angry, basically.
Yeah, how can you not be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it's to protect and serve.
Yeah.
All right, and then so the neighbor called. You extracted the lady, the perpetrator's in the back of the car. What's the next step?
So for me, by the time I got there, they had done some background work on the subject, and he had prior criminal history. He had been recently released from prison, so he was on parole, and he had been drinking. This was a early morning, like 10:30, 11 o'clock, I believe was a time frame. So my job at that point was to attempt to interview him, take him to a formal setting. It's an interview that I want video and audio taped. I'm not going to do it in the back of a patrol car. I'm not going to do it in her house, so a sterile environment. So I have a lot of stuff to do that. I need to get him there. I need to ensure his cooperation, whether or not I'm going to get it. I'm going to have a partner with me for the interview just to help with if I miss something, or, we travel better in pairs for that. And I'm going to need somebody to monitor and set up the equipment process. So generally with something like that, I go over and attempt to build rapport with the subject. So that's what I did. He's in the back of a patrol car. I alluded to when, I said everybody's angry. Here you have a man that's accused of horrible, horrible crimes against this person that could be anybody's grandma. So, to build rapport with someone that has probably been, for lack of a better term, manhandled. He's in the back of a car. I don't think he's comfortable. He doesn't look comfortable. Not that that is my ultimate goal, but it might help if I need his cooperation. So I opened the back of the car and asked him how he was doing. I used his first name, which is common. I identified myself using my first name just in an effort to build rapport. He was being guarded by probably one of the biggest deputies we have on the department. It's just a huge man. So I opened the door and I asked this subject by name if he was being treated okay and how he was doing. He complained that his cuffs were tight and messed up. I looked at his cuffs and it was obvious to me they had probably been put on hurriedly and maybe quickly. They were twisted or whatever. So I asked him to step out. I'm certainly not going to uncuff this guy, right? I'm going to put my cuffs on over these and take his off. I did that. I got him some water, and I just flat out told him, I said, look, I have questions for you. I know you have questions for me. I'm going to read you your rights and see if you want to talk to me. Is that something you want to do?
Right, let me ask you this, because I'm assuming, I know you, and yeah, you're a nice guy, but when it comes to this, there's a tactic to this, correct? You're trying to create kind of a bond. What are the other deputies when they see you being nice to someone who just committed a horrific crime and pretty darn guilty because they pulled them out of the place?
Yeah, it's generally, this was not well received at all. And I just didn't have time to address it then. One of the deputies made a under his breath comment of, I think he kind of swore and said, I don't know how you can blankety do that, or something along those lines. And I said, I will talk later. And I had a goal, and it worked. For me, not to jump too far ahead, but I think it was almost 4 years later when I hit play sitting in front of the jury and was able to play that interview where he confessed. I made me wish I'd been nicer to him.
Yeah, so it's a tactic, of course. If you start coming down on them, and you get more bees with honey.
Yeah.
So I'm going to push it a little farther, but okay. So what made that feel like you were making headway in the interview room? Was it just because you kind of created that little connection, which you need to, because you want to put this guy away as long as possible, so the more you can get him cooperating, right?
Yes.
What was what did you feel like there was a turning point inside that room where he just said he did everything, or is there something at a time?
With depending on the subject you're going to talk to, like this guy'd been to prison, he'd been around the block, and I'm not going to try and fool him.
Yeah.
I'd give him respect. I said, look, I know you've been in and out of the system. I'm just going to lay my cards out on the table. Here's what we're dealing with. I'm going to have to sit you down. I'm going to read you your rights and give you a chance to talk to me. I'll answer any questions you have, and I have questions for you. It gives him a sense of empowerment. Even though he really doesn't have any, he might get the answer to some of the questions. Not the good ones. He's going to want to know how much time is he going to do in prison. I can't predict that. But I was able to answer some questions for him.
All right. So at the end of what happened? What was the finality?
The finality for him, over 120 years in prison, he'll never see the light of day, free light of day again. The victim, I believe, is still alive.
Did you ever find out, I mean, again, never victim blaming, but why did he pick that house? Did he ever come up and see, because a lot of times you see them confess and say, well, that one looked X, or this one looked X. What was the reasoning?
I asked the subject why he picked that house, the suspect, and he said because the yard was unkept. He didn't think anybody was home initially. Of course, he might be saying that just
right,
like I didn't intend to go into a house where someone was in. I don't know, but right, he said I picked the house because the yard was unkept, and the yard was very much unkept.
All right, and then I remember when we were talking pre-interview, what happened with that yard?
We got it cleaned up.
Who's we?
We was academy class. They have service hours. I teach at the academy. They were more than willing to use some of their service hours cleaning a yard, so I arranged that and got it done.
You guys always kept connection with her as well, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, we're going to do another one. This was intriguing and terrible, and I don't know if 126 years is enough, but yeah, thank you for what you did. You brought justice to someone who had their rights taken away. All right. Anything in closing?
No.
All right, Jeff. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for watching the podcast and listening, and we'll see you again. Movement for Change. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast, Movement for Change. We hope that our discussion has left you with new perspectives and insights that can help you change mindsets and save lives. Please visit us at getsafeusa.com for resources, trainings, and if there's a topic you want to hear about or you have questions, please email us at info@getsafeusa.com. Together, we can make the change we want to see.